When looking back at the Air India plane crash on June 12th, we all feel sympathy for the unfortunate victims. But if you check which airline the crashed aircraft belonged to, a familiar name will appear: Boeing. The reason Boeing is no stranger to catastrophic air accidents is that the frequency of incidents and even fatal crashes involving this aircraft manufacturer is much higher than what would be expected for a company with the prestigious standing it has built over its 109 years. But why has Boeing made so many mistakes? Why are more and more people afraid every time they board a Boeing plane? And why are former Boeing employees willing to come forward and harshly denounce their former employer? An overview of Boeing, the pride of U.S. civil aviation. Today, Boeing Company is known as the world's largest manufacturer of commercial aircraft. Going back to the dawn of its history in 1916, William Boeing was the one who laid the first foundation for the company with the Boeing Model 1 seaplane. Later that same year, he founded Pacific Aero Products, the predecessor of today's Boeing. Over roughly 20 years of development, Boeing rose to prominence and gradually merged other major companies into its corporation. For example, United Airlines, now the largest airline in the U.S., and Pratt & Whitney, now the largest U.S. supplier of aircraft engines. It was only when the Airmail Act of 1934 was passed, requiring aviation-related conglomerates to separate aircraft manufacturing from airline operations, that Boeing, Pratt & Whitney, United Airlines, and many others split from their parent corporation, United Aircraft and Transport Corporation. From there, a diverse ecosystem of aviation companies in various sectors was formed in the United States. One aspect few people notice is that during World War II, Boeing and McDonnell Douglas were two trusted contractors for the U.S. defense sector, racing to produce various aircraft models from passenger planes to weapon carriers so that the U.S. could supply the Allies or use them directly in battles, such as the Model 307 Stratoliner and bombers like the B-17 and B-29. The production and manufacturing of military equipment not only helped the Allies suppress the Axis powers, but also helped the U.S. partially recover from the Great Depression after 1929 by creating tens of thousands of jobs and boosting the manufacturing economy. According to statistics, before the United States officially entered World War II in 1940, Boeing had only about 9,900 employees. But just 4 years later, this number had increased sevenfold to 75,000 employees. Similarly, during the Cold War, Boeing became a strategic card in balancing power with the Soviet Union through advanced aircraft such as the Boeing B-47 Stratojet, the world's first jet bomber, and the B-52 Stratofortress, America's flying fortress with 8 jet engines and formidable destructive power. After both the World Wars and the Cold War, Boeing gradually became a familiar partner of the U.S. government. Both sides relied on each other to grow in scale and global stature. Meanwhile, Americans witnessed powerful, imposing military aircraft, and then could simply buy a ticket and sit comfortably and safely on Boeing's civilian planes. When the Cold War ended in 1991, Boeing shifted its focus more toward the commercial sector rather than the military, making the company increasingly familiar to the American public. The peak of trust was encapsulated in a saying Americans passed down after decades of flying Boeing: "If it ain't Boeing, I'm not going." This roughly translates to, "If it's not Boeing, I won't go," showing how Boeing's civil aviation dominance monopolized the trust of Americans as well as international customers after decades in the market. In the early 1990s, Boeing was a monument to safety, precision, and the pinnacle of engineering at the end of the 20th century. Any engineer working for Boeing at that time was immensely proud. Employees in other positions at the time were not only well paid, but also felt they belonged to a friendly, close-knit family where everyone from executives to engineers cared deeply about the lives of hundreds of people on every flight. They all shared that heavy responsibility together. It could be said that Boeing in the early 1990s was the best place to work in America. However, this only lasted briefly while Boeing was still Boeing. In 1997, one of the most pivotal mergers in U.S. aviation history took place when Boeing acquired McDonnell Douglas and became the sole aircraft manufacturer. Nothing would have gone wrong if Boeing's culture of engineering and safety had spread to McDonnell Douglas. However, the opposite happened. Henry Stonecipher, CEO of McDonnell Douglas, after the merger with Boeing, retained the position of president and chief operating officer of the new company. 6 years later, he climbed straight to the CEO position of the corporation. When news of this broke, aviation enthusiasts and industry insiders were deeply concerned, as everyone in the field knew that Stonecipher was a finance mogul, not someone who cared about engineering. He had been described this way since taking over the company, someone who only cared about the company's stock performance on Wall Street, without considering aircraft safety or engineering issues. Taking advantage of the decline of aging former leaders, along with his knowledge of politics and finance, this man rose to occupy Boeing's top leadership positions. In the past, although his company ranked second only to Boeing in supplying aircraft, an excessive focus on finance rather than engineering had given McDonnell Douglas a bad reputation. People had every reason to worry about the cultural infiltration into Boeing, and gradually, those concerns became reality when Boeing released the most notorious aircraft in its civil aviation history, the Boeing 737 MAX. The 737 MAX, Boeing's flying coffin. Before diving into the main story, let's look at the aircraft that made Boeing extremely anxious in the early 2010s, the Airbus A320neo. With larger engine options than its predecessor, the Neo allowed aircraft to save 15 to 20% more fuel. The A320neo made waves when it was unveiled on December 1, 2010. A stunning blow hit Boeing when American Airlines, a trusted partner for decades, signed its first official commitment to purchase 260 Airbus planes, including the newest A320neo. This pushed Boeing to create an improved aircraft to compete with Airbus. However, creating an entirely new aircraft design is no easy task. Designing a brand new model would require thousands of separate tasks and would cause Boeing to fall further behind Airbus. Not to mention, the estimated cost of developing a single new design was around $10 billion for Boeing. For these reasons, Boeing came up with a more economical idea. They opted to update the 737 Next Generation, an improved version of the original Boeing 737, to create the Boeing 737 MAX at a cost of only about $3 billion. On August 30, 2011, Boeing officially unveiled the Boeing 737 MAX, an upgraded version of the original 737 that had existed since the 1960s. It may sound old, but the Boeing 737 had developed over decades with 3 generations of improvements. Therefore, the 737 MAX inherited nearly all of those advantages and added many new features expected to sell extremely well. The numbers spoke for themselves. Within just 3 months of its launch, Boeing had received over 700 firm purchase commitments from 9 partners. Even more impressively, before the 737 MAX's first flight in 2016, Boeing had already secured 3,000 orders from dozens of partners worldwide, making it the most ordered aircraft in aviation history. To achieve such remarkable numbers, Boeing promoted the 737 MAX as having upgraded engines that saved more fuel than its predecessors and were 14% more efficient than Airbus's latest model. In addition, its longer range and upgraded, more pilot-friendly cockpit were other reasons airlines believed the 737 MAX would become the star of their future fleets, but things did not go as smoothly as planned. Before delving deeper, let's examine the safety rates of the civil aviation industry. In 2017, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, reported that worldwide there were no recorded accidents involving passenger jet aircraft in 13 million flights. There were only 5 accidents involving cargo aircraft or small turboprop planes, causing around 50 casualties out of more than 4 billion passengers across all forms of air travel. To this day, 2017 is still considered the safest year in aviation in the past 60 years. However, just 1 year later, the same period when the 737 MAX officially entered service, things changed drastically. 2 crashes occurred within less than 5 months. From November 2018 to May 2019, the global aviation industry witnessed a total of 346 deaths, all on the same aircraft model, the Boeing 737 MAX. The first incident involved Indonesia's Lion Air Flight JT610, which plunged into the waters off Java just 50 minutes after takeoff. Before the investigation in Indonesia could be completed, Ethiopian Airlines Flight ET302 crashed just 39 miles from its departure airport, killing 157 people. This was unprecedented in the history of aviation. Not to mention, both crashed aircraft were the most modern model at the time, the Boeing 737 MAX. Aviation authorities worldwide, led by the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, urgently grounded all 737 MAX aircraft worldwide. The world's most advanced passenger jet was now banned from flying, causing an estimated $5 to $10 billion in losses for airlines operating the 737 MAX. Despite concerns over their finances, airlines had no choice but to park their 737 MAX fleets in long-term storage, awaiting an unprecedented inspection process in aviation history with Boeing. Black box data analysis. When analyzing the flight data recorder from Lion Air's first crash, investigators noticed something unusual in the chart, showing the aircraft's nose attitude. The orange graph at the bottom shows changes in nose direction caused by the aircraft's automatic trim system. Meanwhile, the blue graph indicates the same parameter changes, but made by the pilots. Notice the repeated up and down spikes in the second half of the chart. There were a total of 26 instances where the automated system pushed the nose down. According to the recorded timeline, these actions occurred within just 10 minutes before flight JT610 crashed. In response to each of those 26 nose-down commands, the captain pulled the nose back up as shown in the blue graph another 26 times. Just by looking at these orange and blue lines, experts could grasp the immense struggle the captain endured to fight against a system he was supposed to control.